Merry Christmas, everyone. This is the Paranormal Guys. We are on break right now, so this is a recorded episode, but we wanted to make sure that you got your paranormal in for Christmas. So Merry Christmas. We will see you after the new year. So let's see who I have hiding backstage here. I have my wonderful and beautiful co-host, Miss Cheyenne. How are you?
I am fabulous. How are you? Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Of course you are. So you're working too much. We have a well, duty calls. We have a scheduled guest, Tim tonight, Tim Rayborn. He has written a Christmas horror book. Now this is right up your alley, Cheyenne. Let's bring him out and let him start telling us. Yeah, I know. You're into the Christmas horror. You're into the horror, period. Hey, Tim, how are you? Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Nice to see you both.
You too.
Fabulous to have you.
Yeah, we're glad you could take time out of your busy schedule for us.
No, it's fine. I'm glad we were able to nail down a date. Finally, it was a little bit iffy there for a bit. So
yeah. We went back and forth. So yeah, it is what it is. It's the holiday season. Everybody's got something going on. So.
Exactly, it happens.
Yeah, hopefully Santa will be good to me. I'll find out later today. So.
Is that a case of fingers crossed or don't hold your breath? You know,
don't hold your breath.
Depends what my wife told Santa.
Oh, you're in trouble then. You're in real trouble then.
More than likely.
He'll be lucky if he gets a lone pair of underwear and a set of socks.
I'll get a sweater and a lump on the head is what I'll get.
That's Krampus. You get a swat on the back, you know.
You'll get your you might end up getting your own little snow globe.
Aw. As long as you don't send me any crystals, I'll be happy.
No. Next year I will make sure that it is at least double the size bigger.
Okay. All right. Well, we're not going to talk about that on Christmas.
You guys carry on. I'm fine.
After I hit stop recording, I'll show you. It was my birthday present. I'll show it.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to do it.
He loved it.
So Tim, tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about your book.
Oh dear. Oh boy. Talk about myself. I'm a writer, professional writer. I've been for many years, also professional musician, though. These days, I mostly just focus on writing. I write books for a living, actually. It's what I do. I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. Some of my own. Sometimes I'm hired by publishers to write books. And the one we're going to talk about today is actually something I was hired to write because I'd already written a number of books for them about paranormal topics and other things. So when they proposed this series, my name came up as the person most likely to want to do it. So and of course, I jumped at the chance. It was great. So yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about that today. I've got many years of writing experience, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. I guess I have a website if anybody's interested in this book or my other books. More than happy to direct them to where they can buy them. Available in a lot of stores. Most stores carry them. So yeah, I'd be delighted to talk about this and a little bit more. So yeah, happy to be here. And the book that we're going to talk about a little bit today is The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, which is a collection of tales. It's a collection of stories or surveys, if you will, about all sorts of terrifying Christmas monsters, mainly in Europe, a few other places as well. Winter and winter month sort of creatures that haunted the minds of Europeans from anywhere from Iceland all the way to Turkey. So we can kind of delve deeply into those and talk a little bit about why winter, why over the holidays, why are these creatures, in the backgrounds of our subconscious at that time and what that might mean, and what are some of them and what horrible things do they do. So happy to talk about all of that today.
And Europe always has the best ones during the holidays too. We need to get more creative over here.
Yes. Yeah, there's a long tradition of them. Japan has some really cool stuff too, particularly with like ghost stories and things. I'll talk a little bit about those. Yeah, I mean, as you know, Japanese ghost legends are pretty horrifying. If you've ever seen The Ring or The Grudge or those sorts of things, and they have some that are very winter. Obviously not Christmas, but from their own winter traditions as well. So, although Japan goes big in on the sort of commercial side of Christmas, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It's quite funny actually. So they love it there. Yeah,
I think Coca-Cola is the biggest influence on ours. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when I was writing this book, I actually looked for if there were any like American Christmas folk legends about monsters, and particularly from things like New England. You'd think that maybe in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Vermont,
Yes.
there would be like horrible, Christmas werewolves.
Can we get a
or
Christmas witch?
there's
It's Massachusetts. Give us a Christmas witch.
Yeah, there's nothing. Curiously enough, in Massachusetts of all places, I didn't find a single scrap of American folklore to deal with like holiday and winter horrors. Now, there must be some, but I didn't find it when I was doing this. And since I was kind of under a deadline to get it done, I just didn't have the time to look more. So I mostly focused on Europe and a little bit on Japan and a few other places in the world. It says the subtitle is Around the World, but it really is mostly Europe. But yeah, it is curious that as rich as American folklore is, and as interesting as there are all these interesting stories about creatures and unexplained phenomena, none of them are specifically tied to winter here that I've been able to find. They probably do exist. I just haven't been able to locate them yet. I'm sure there's some folklorists listening to this that will call in or email you and say, well, here's 17 examples that he missed, but
Might be good for volume 2. So.
Well, there are others coming in the series, and I'll talk about that later. So, yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the most famous is Krampus.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. People more and more are beginning to learn about Krampus and who Krampus is, and we can talk a little bit about that happily. So,
sure. Oh, I need to go to one of the Krampus festivals.
Oh yeah, they're super fun. They're really fun. So Krampus is a really interesting character who has its origins in Germanic, Austrian, Swiss sort of folklore. It's very much Alpine, sort of like northern Switzerland, the Austrian Alps, and where the Alps and Switzerland meet Germany, and particularly in the remote villages in there. Krampus, as you may or may not know, is a sort of goat-like sort of monster, demon, whatever, who haunts the winter months and is particularly associated with the Catholic saint, Saint Nicholas. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute. But the two of them in the traditional Krampus parades and celebrations always go together. So somebody would always dress as the historical Saint Nicholas, and someone would always dress as Krampus as they went door to door in villages. Now, the historical Saint Nicholas, we associate Saint Nick with Santa Claus, obviously. It's one of the versions of Santa Claus. The historical Saint Nicholas was a real person, Nicholas of Cusa, I believe, who lived in what's now modern Turkey in the 3rd century. And Nicholas, excuse me, was known for being very generous, for gift giving, for helping out the poor. He became sort of a patron saint, if you will, of gift giving. And there's one connection with Santa, actually. It comes from that. And there are all sorts of stories about Nicholas and his gift giving. But there's one particular story anyway, which is the first story in this book, actually, that's rather gruesome and horrible. And of course, I had to include it. It's a story about these 3 boys, who are out playing, doing something, and they realize that they've been wandering too long and it's getting dark. So they're not going to be able to make it home before dark. So they go to the nearest village and they're looking for a place where they can sleep for the night. And they come upon the residence of an old butcher. And they knock on his door and they ask him if he can put them up for the night, and then in the following morning, they'll be able to go home to their own town, their own village. Well, the butcher says, sure, come on in. But this is the sort of Sweeney Todd type butcher. He already has something horrible in mind. So he murders them. He chops them up into little pieces, and he puts all the pieces into a big barrel filled with brine to cure so that he can sell it as meat later on, as sausages and whatever. And so for 7 years, the boys' dead bodies are curing in this meat while the evil butcher is waiting to serve them up. So St. Nicholas hears about this and comes to visit the butcher and confronts him about it. And then he says some prayers and makes signs and whatever. And the 3 boys are miraculously stitched back together and brought back to life and emerge from the brine. And after that, they go away. And the butcher, we don't know what quite happens to the butcher. The story is not historical from Nicholas's time. It's from much later. It's from the 11th or 12th century. So really almost 1,000 years after Nicholas lived. But one of the pieces of legend is that the butcher was condemned to become the sort of goat-headed demon that would travel with Nicholas throughout all eternity. And it's a tenuous link. We don't actually know if that's recent or if that was an older legend, but some people like to associate Krampus with this cannibalistic butcher that was going to sell children parts as sausages, basically. So Krampus's role in Germanic folklore is that he's sort of the anti-Santa. If children have been good, they get fruits and nuts and sweets and candies and little toys. If they've been bad, Krampus snatches them up with a big birch stick and gives them a big whack on the butt or on the head, throws them in the sack and drags them off. And if they've been really bad, they may never come back. So he serves as the kind of the lump of coal, but the sort of death metal version of the lump of coal, if you will. It's if you get thrown in Krampus's sack or his cage, you're not coming back. So this was a popular folkloric element of the holiday celebrations in Germany and Switzerland and Austria, parts of northern Italy for many, many centuries. That the story of the demon Krampus that travels with St. Nicholas, and St. Nicholas's Day is December 6th, so it's actually still celebrated. That's the Roman Catholic feast day. So the night before is known as Krampusnacht, which is Krampus's night. So that's the night that all the little boys and girls, if you have not been good, Krampus will come and snatch you up. But if you have been good, Nicholas will reward you the next day. So they celebrate that on the 5th and 6th rather than on Christmas Day. But it's still very much a part of that whole calendar of events that happens throughout the winter months. So
we need to bring that back.
Yeah, I agree. I think not just kids. I think of a lot of adults that need a good thrashing with birch sticks, to be perfectly honest. So yeah. Throw them in
got a list.
Well,
we need a list.
you gotta be good. You'll get your fruit and nuts from Santa if you're not.
So it's interesting
can't tell you what's gonna happen.
No, not at all. There's a whole bunch of variations on Krampus and other characters throughout all of these sort of cultures and things that are similar sorts of things. They're often vengeful creatures of the night that come and punish the evil doers, so it's particularly children. And so that's like a through line theme running through most of these things. And it's interesting to talk about because we tend to think of the holidays as, in our modern world, they can be very stressful for people, but at least in theory, the holidays are a time of friends and family and feasting and having good food and good drinks and celebration and singing carols and giving gifts. And it's generally considered a happy time. Obviously, for many people, it's not. Many people, it's very stressful or sad or depressing. But the commercial thing that we push is that it's very happy and it's a time for gathering and all of these things. And yet the through line of all of these stories is that they're very dark. They're Grimm's fairy tale level dark. And yet they are intimately associated with the winter months, some with Christian ideas, some with pagan ideas. But it's interesting that, so we wonder, why do these things sit together? So why is there such a strong streak of horror going through the time that's supposed to be one of the most wonderful time of the year? And there's a lot of interesting theories about it. But the thing I think is that we forget in our modern world, and not everybody has these luxuries, but if we're fortunate enough to have a home that's heated and has electricity and is comfortable and we have food, and if we're short on food, we can just go down to the local store and buy it, and we have a roof over our head. If you're thinking about previous centuries, particularly in impoverished small towns and villages, those were not guarantees after November. And a lot of people looked at that time as a very, very daunting time. Between November and even early March, it could snow, it could ice, it could be freezing. And you only have a limited amount of food that's going to last for the winter. You only have a limited amount of shelter or firewood. You might not be able to make it. So there was no guarantee, particularly if you were very young or very old, that you were going to even make it to February or March. So it is a kind of liminal time between life and death. It's when the darkness in Northern Europe is dominant, when the dark is very much a part of your life, when particularly if you get into Scandinavia, you may only have 4, 5, 6 hours of daylight before it turns dark again. So it's a time to allow the imagination to run wild, but it's also being outside is death. If you get lost in a snowdrift in a forest, you're gone. That's it. So a lot of the Grimm's fairy tales, as we look at them, are warnings for children to be careful about going into the forest, about trusting strangers. This, I think, is an extension of that. Do not go off. Do not stray from the path. If you have to go into the forest, go with someone, because if you get caught out, you're dead. And we don't have to sugarcoat that. That's it.
And it wasn't a time to, you got to be good for your presents and everything. It's just, no, keep your crap in line, or.
And there was
no sparing of the children's feelings. It was just scare them straight.
And also everybody had to pull their weight. This is the thing, even kids, like there was work to be done to prepare the animals, to prepare the farms, to get enough firewood, to make sure you had smoked meat and your grain was all in. So a child didn't have the luxury of sort of goofing off and being disobedient or running off and playing all day, particularly as these months came along. So if you didn't pull your weight, you were letting everybody down, and that could actually potentially have terrible ramifications for the whole community. So there was a sense of like social responsibility, community responsibility, and it's kind of like, as I said, there's these creatures often, when we talk about them, and we'll talk about a few in a minute, live at the edges of society. They're not part of the community. They're the other. They're the separate, and it's very much what we kind of talk about with modern, cryptozoology and things. These creatures operate outside of our aliens. They operate outside of there's our world and there's their world, and there's our world that's the village, and the evil ogre or the evil witch lives in the forest, and you don't go into that forest because that's their space. This is our space. It's kind of like the M. Night Shyamalan film, The Village. It has that same sort of, This is our space. Think of it that way. I mean, obviously there was a twist to that, but it's the same idea. The monsters live there. We live there here. We don't cross their boundary. They don't cross ours. So there's this kind of the sense of that. So these night terrors live out there. They may be considered, symbols or myths. They are representations of the actual dangers of nature, whether that's getting lost in the snow or getting hunted by an angry and hungry wolf or a wildcat or something. These things represent the dark parts of the psyche, but there's still this very much a sense of otherness. We are ourselves and they are over there, and we leave them alone and they leave us alone. So don't goof off, don't cause them any problems, or they will come and get you if you violate that truce really between us. And this was never more apparent than in the winter months, when there was so much darkness and so much cold, and nature was really waiting to kill you at any moment, and you could die at any moment from disease or from starvation or from freezing to death. These were very real very real, things that happen. So it's not really surprising that if you look at a continent that has pretty intense winters, that the northern part of the continent is going to have these collections of sort of monster legends and things associated with the darkest time of the year. And over time, some of them got wrapped up into Christmas as well. And it became the sort of thing, well, be good or this thing will come and get to you, so it sort of develops that way. And I think they kind of develop side by side over the centuries. So that's where we start getting this rich lore of different holiday and winter monsters, and they're very different. Some of them are different from place to place, and even you might have a Krampus legend in one village in Austria, and 30 miles away in Switzerland they might have a completely different version, but the same idea is there, but they develop according to the local color. So there's a lot of old pageants about these creatures. There's parades, there's celebrations and such, and they're starting to take off now in America and other places, and people have turned them into these big elaborate things. And some people are a little upset with that. They feel that it's taken some of the spirit away from what they were originally meant to attend, and turned them into these big commercial things with these elaborate Krampus costumes and noise and music and whatever. And it's an interesting way of looking at how folklore morphs and changes in different cultures and such. And this has sort of been taken over by cultures where it didn't start and changed into something that's not really what they were intended for. I find that, as someone who's interested in folklore, really fascinating, just to see how different cultures adopt these practices. So that's a little bit of a background on the idea of holiday and winter and Christmas monsters in general and what they might represent. So yeah.
Did the Vikings, were they a part of that, or did they have something separate? Do you know?
Well, it's one of my specialties is actually Norse history. They have their own stories. They have some of their own legends. They're more recent than the Viking Age, than the Norse Age in general, most of them. And I'm going to talk about one in particular in a few minutes. There's a great one that we'll talk about. So there isn't a direct connection to these, but undoubtedly there is an underlying sense that some of the folklore and spiritual things absolutely do carry through from there, because there are common links between sort of Germanic pagan spirituality and Old Norse, the Old Norse gods and such. They absolutely have some of the same DNA, certainly. So yeah, the answer to your question is kind of sort of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just learning a little bit of the Norse, and so I'm actually have you on for a show about Norse.
Oh, well, just as a quick thing, I do have a new book out also called Northern Mythology, which is a comprehensive guide to the entire Nordic world, including Finnish and Sami beliefs as well. So I'd love to talk about that. If you would like to talk about that at some point, I'd be happy to.
Absolutely. That may already be in my Kindle cart.
Oh, okay, good.
I think it may be, actually. So
excellent. Well, I can highly recommend it.
It comes from a good person.
Pretty good. So
yeah, I understand. A friend of mine went to, I want to say it was the Netherlands for Christmas, and he was just like taken back. He's like, oh, what is this?
Yeah,
it's totally different, because they had a parade, and then their version of, I guess it was Krampus, is a whole lot different.
It's different. Others. They have a character called Frau Perchta, which is Black Pete, and it's a similar kind of
That's
thing.
Correct.
So yeah. Yeah. And there's some concern about that because originally I think the character was meant to imply that there was a kind of like the black on his face came from coal or soot or whatever from being in chimneys, but it also kind of devolved into something kind of racist, and for a while it was done with like blackface and such. So there's been some controversies about that in recent decades. It's like, is this the actual cultural original thing, or was this something with a 19th century racist overlay? But so it's kind of a controversial thing. I know the Dutch version, but there are many versions of this type of character that exists throughout Europe.
And it's funny learning about that. I found out about that from The Office.
Yeah.
Along with Belschnickel.
Yes, that's a wonderful one. Yeah, who's in my book as well. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the other monsters. One of my favorite. Let me see if I can find it. This book, as I said, this book I wrote has some absolutely splendid illustrations. It's a Scottish illustrator named Neil Adams, and he just brought these things to absolutely horrific life. One of my favorites is Frau Perchta, who's known in Austria and Bavaria, and you can see her absolutely horrible visage here with the big scythe. Yeah.
Oh my.
So Frau Perchta is another knight, a kind of witch, a demon, whatever you want to call her, used to scare children, and it was the same kind of thing. Children were expected to do their duty, do their work, and all of that. And one of the things that they were said to do is sometimes you're supposed to leave porridge or other things out for the night spirits to visit. And this is kind of where we get our milk and cookies for Santa sort of thing. And one of the things here, though, is that Perchta will go from village to village and house to house and inspect to make sure that children have done all of the household chores. That's her main thing, really. It's not so much if they've been good, but have they done their nighttime chores? If they have, she passes over, and especially if they leave something for her, that's even better. If they have not, she takes her big scythe, which you saw in there, slits open their bellies, pulls out their entrails, I don't know if she eats them or puts them somewhere, takes a load of straw and rocks, stuffs it into their bellies, and kind of sews them back up. So when the parents come in the morning, the child is dead and their belly is stuffed with straw. So happy holidays. It's pretty horrible. That's like something out of one of those, like horrible, schlocky, R-rated horror films or something. There's like a total horror film waiting to be made with that. So that's one example. She's kind of Krampus adjacent, probably a much older Germanic spirit, possibly even one of the old Germanic goddesses at one point that kind of morphed into an evil spirit over time during Christianization. She was demonized and turned into this horrible creature. But this is the kind of things which haunts children's imaginations, particularly in previous centuries. So she's a very good example of that. There's a bunch of others. You were talking about Vikings and the Norse. There's a terrific one from Iceland called Jólinkattr, the Yule Cat, and I love the Yule Cat. Yule Cat is an institution in Iceland, in Reykjavik, in the city of Reykjavik. They have a gigantic lit up Yule Cat that you can pose with for pictures. They leave it up during the whole holiday season. The Yule Cat is a gigantic sort of cat. Could look like a house cat, could look like a wild cat. Nobody knows. And one of the things about Yule Cat is it's a similar kind of thing to these others. What it was is that children who had been good, had done all of their farm work and all these, because historical Iceland was mostly farms and farmsteads. There were no real towns there. It was mostly just collections of farms and very small villages. And so there was a lot of work to be done to prepare for the very, very brutal winters that happened in Iceland. And one of the stories was that children who did all of their farm work, who did all of their housework and such, would be rewarded with new clothes on Christmas. Now, if you're a child, getting clothes on Christmas is probably the worst thing you can imagine. You get your aunt's sweater or the socks. It's like the worst thing in the world. But in those days, getting new clothes was a pretty big deal. If there were a way of keeping warm and somebody took the trouble to make these things for you, that was a big deal. So children were rewarded with brand new clothes, warm clothes, colorful, bright clothes. It was considered a real honor, and it was great. However, if you were not good, then you didn't get those clothes, or maybe you just got your old ones repaired. Now, the Yule Cat on Christmas Eve, I believe, or maybe it was Christmas night, is a gigantic sort of 8-10 foot tall creature that roams the wilds of Iceland. And on those nights, he walks from village to village, from house to house, from farm to farm, peering in the window to see if the children are wearing their new clothes that they've gotten for being good, or if they have not, and they're just wearing scraps or anything. Now, if they're wearing clothes, he'll pass over that and move to the next one. If they're not wearing clothes, he will break into the house, take whatever food they were eating for their Christmas dinner and eat that so that they're left that. He will then abduct them and drag them out into the snow, kill them and eat them. So that's the second course. So So
I was
it's
thinking cat, okay, you got your new clothes, you're not appreciating your new clothes. Cat comes in, shreds your clothes.
yeah, no, if you have the new clothes, you're safe. If you don't have new clothes, then you're in trouble. So yeah, you run the real risk of being devoured by the Yule Cat. Now, we don't know how old this legend is. The earliest written sources of it are only from like the early 19th century, but it probably is something considerably older than that. These kinds of things tend to not evolve in vacuums, and it probably had a lot of influence from the continent. But yeah, I love that one. So Yule Cat is a big deal in Iceland. And they have, as I said, they have this giant Yule Cat made out of lights that's about 8-10 feet tall in Reykjavik in the square, and people pose for pictures with it. And it's kind of it's like their national, one of their national holiday symbols. But it's interesting that it comes from such a dark place that they use this, and they have, you walk down the streets and there's all these Christmas trees and Christmas lights, and then right in the middle of the thing, there's a Yule Cat. So it's interesting juxtaposition of kind of holiday and horror that exists in the modern world. And I love that.
Well, I mean, it just comes right back to, Grimm's fairy tales, how horrific, the actual story of like Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella was. And then
absolutely the stepsisters cut off their toes so that they could try to fit into the slipper, because and there's all sorts of the original Snow White, isn't it, that the mother has to put on these red hot shoes and dances herself to death or something. There's all sorts of terrible.
Yeah, there's some crazy ones, but it, like, even with like you were saying with Santa, just how sugar coated everything becomes.
Yeah. And I miss that.
We need to bring back scaring the kids around the holidays.
I like it because it does actually is a reminder of that sort of fragility of life and that sort of thing. We've kind of lost that. We're out of touch with that. We're a little, in some ways, we're a little
hey, look what you have. Look what these people didn't have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Appreciate that new pair of socks.
Yeah.
Or the cat's coming for you.
Yeah. Yeah, the fragility of life is something that kind of people have become a little disconnected from. And I think that's what these stories actually speak to, and what they're talking about is that being mindful of that, and how the community depends upon everybody and nobody gets a pass and nobody can get away from that. And we are one group of people, and we have to look out for each other, and the outside world is potentially quite dangerous. So we have to be careful about that. So yeah, there's a through line through most of these stories, that whether it's Iceland, whether it's Sweden, whether it's Austria or Greece or Turkey, they all have similar kinds of themes to them. And it kind of comes from they kind of bubble up from, I think, from the same kind of unconscious sort of concepts of belonging and not belonging, and fear of the unknown, and fear of one's place in the natural world. And it's really interesting to see how each of these different regions develops their own versions of these kinds of stories. And it is very much, for Northern Europe, it's very much winter centric, because you don't really hear a whole lot about summer solstice monsters, because the sun's up for 17 to 20 hours a day, and it's often warm and bright, and so it's not really a place that monsters are going to live in that sense. So it really is very much a seasonal thing. It's a product of the northern hemisphere, and being in those specific regions, it can be very dark and very cold for a lot of months. And so I think that's what we're looking at. It predates Christmas by far, absolutely, but some of these things have been sort of roped into Christmas as well, in the various solstice or Christmas celebrations, New Year's, all of those things can have these kinds of stories wrapped around them. Definitely, when these cultures adopted Christianity, they did not really get rid of a lot of their old beliefs. They just currently sit by side. They sat side by side, really. And they're an example of cultural blending, and how you can't really eradicate those kinds of deep beliefs, because they exist on a sort of mythic, unconscious level, and they're a part of like human psyche and a part of the human belief systems and such. So they survived and even thrived under new beliefs and new things. So it's really interesting to see. It's interesting. One of the things in Austria and in Germany, the Nazis banned Krampus celebrations during their tenure there, and as soon as they were done, they came right back. So it's interesting. They thought they were really subversive, and it was not conducive to order and whatever. So all Krampus celebrations were banned. But then in the aftermath, in the later 1940s, they started making a comeback, and now Krampus is a huge thing, both there and in the United States. So it's really fascinating. You can't really suppress these things. Yeah.
Well, and once you start, once the horror people start finding out more stuff like that, then it starts, they're like, yes, we need it.
Well, there is a great, you've probably seen it, the Krampus film. It came out a few years ago. It's actually good
Mhm.
fun. And it actually tells the story fairly well. It's its own thing and it makes up a lot of stuff. But I think it captures the spirit of it quite well with the
It
horrendous
was a
notes.
great a great combination of comedy and horror.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like those. It has that kind of
Mhm,
all back to like these classics from the 1980s.
mhm.
There's one that I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to watch it maybe even this weekend. It's called There's Something in the Barn. And it's in Norway.
Hmm.
And it's about an American family that inherits a farm in Norway. And they learn the Norwegian spirit called a nisse, which is popular in Norwegian folklore, lives in the barn. And they look like little bearded guys that are about, so tall, about a foot tall or whatever. And according to
Like a
Norwegian
gnome.
folklore, yeah, kind of a gnome or a little dwarf kind of thing. And yeah, the folklore is that you're supposed to leave out porridge for them with honey and maybe cream or butter in it, and it keeps them happy. But if you start doing certain things, they will absolutely wreak havoc on your house and cause problems. And so this is a story about a bunch of clueless Americans that move there, don't actually honor the Nisa that's there, and then it turns their life. It's kind of like Gremlins, basically. It becomes sort of like a kind of disaster film about this little creature sort of basically making their lives absolute hell. It's a kind of horror comedy, and I haven't seen it. I'm going to watch it hopefully this weekend. But it's an example of like ancient folkloric beliefs finding their way into modern popular culture and becoming popular movies
And what's interesting with that is because I haven't heard of that before, but in reading like the Harry Potter books,
Mhm.
there are creatures in Harry Potter in the books, not in the movies,
Right.
that are very similar.
Yeah.
So you
Mhm.
can start seeing where people are pulling stuff from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a pretty common theme throughout Celtic and northern Scandinavian mythology that these small creatures, whether they're fairies, whether they're gnomes, whatever, often inhabit houses. And as long as you treat them well and with respect, they will help. They will even do household chores and whatever. But if you start disrespecting them or whatever, the best case scenario is they'll just leave. Worst case scenarios, they will make your life absolute hell. So this is a through line that you find in a lot of Northern European mythology. So it's only natural that at some point people would start making movies or shows about this sort of thing as well. So yeah, it's a fascinating way to see how ancient folklore finds its way into modern contemporary entertainment. Really,
And
yeah,
I love all the crazy stuff like that came out of Germany at the time.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
even just with Krampus, but again with stuff that I found out from watching The Office of just how much stuff how many like German stories and things that there were of just to scare your kids into like they had mentioned if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Strollpeter,
Yeah.
who would cut kids' thumbs off if they sucked their
Right.
thumbs.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good one. Sure,
He would
why not?
take his big sharp scissors out and cut little
That's
kids'
right.
thumbs off for sucking their thumbs.
I think there's a Grimm's fairy tale about that as well, actually. So it's a very deep. I was gonna say deep cut, no pun intended, but pun intended. you know,
Did it ching?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of those stories are filled with violence and blood and death and mutilation and all sorts of horrible things. But that was, and again, I think it's again, people, if we're looking at the time that these things came up, and we don't know how old some of these stories are. Some of them may date back to the Middle Ages, some of them might be 16th, 17th, 18th century, but people in general, as I was saying, lived closer to nature then. And so they saw the cycle of life and death much, much more than we do. And they had their own farm animals, and the kids would be there when they slaughtered their animals. They would slice their throat, and blood would be everywhere. And
They
people,
would be the ones doing it too.
you didn't have the luxury of being squeamish if you were going to survive, and that's what it is. So you had to slit open that pig from throat to belly, take its intestines out. You had to gut the fish and pull its innards out. People didn't have a lot of patience for squeamishness. So it's not completely surprising that these kid stories can be very violent and bloody because that was a part of life. Basically.
You had to suck it up.
Yeah, basically, yeah, and that's it. So So yeah, we kind of, again, it's the thing that we forget. We're kind of divorced from that in the modern world. But I think one of the reasons these things are so violent is not for the sake of like shock and gore and whatever, but it was just a normal part of life. And people died of horrible accidents all the time. People chopping wood chopped their thumb off, or they got the mist and got a big gash in their leg, and then it got infected and they died of gangrene. You know, there was no antibiotics, there was no modern medical treatments. So.
Well, there was very much that you didn't. Oh, we have to cater to the children. It was we're all on the same level here. If you can't,
yes, they were working members of the family.
Yeah. Children were basically treated as miniature adults and expected to behave accordingly. After about, certainly in the Middle Ages, it was up till about age 6 or 7, kids could kind of be kids. And then after that, it was like, all right, that was often the age 7 or 8 was often the age when boys in upper class families were sent away to be like pages for knights or to be in service to somebody else before they came back. So your childhood ended at about the age of 8, basically, if and then you had to do things. So that was the way it went. So yeah, the kind of Victorian concept of the innocence of childhood is very much that sort of 19th century and on, and very much an upper class kind of thing. And it's something that we now hold to, but it wasn't really a part of most thinking, up until that point. So yeah, so the stories could be very violent and bloody because you were expected to be a part of that world.
That's how it was.
Yeah.
Real life.
Yeah.
There was no sugarcoating anything. It was just this has been my quote for 2024. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Yeah. F around and find out, basically. Yep. So yeah.
Yep.
How did we make the jump from this to the Grinch, who is, I mean, he's a bad guy, but he's not that bad.
That's an interesting story. I don't honestly know. Dr. Seuss, obviously, Theodore Guyz, who's German or Swiss or something, interestingly enough. So that's why a lot of his stories are a little demented and weird. There's that tradition kind of coming. Yeah, I do see him as kind of a modern fabulist, a modern folklorist. There's things. So yeah, some of his stories are really weird and dark, and that's part of the appeal of them. Actually, they're a little. Cat in the Hat is fun, but he's a little sinister, and the Grinch is horrible, and there's a whole bunch of those sorts of things there. So yeah, it could just be from the culture that he grew up with. He might have grown up with the original Grimm's fairy tales. Yeah. And you think of like Hans Christian Andersen, of course, is another one. His fairy tales are full of blood and gore. The Red Shoes, the original version of The Little Mermaid, is terrible. The Snow Queen, they're all awful. So, and he was Danish. He lived in Odense, which is on the main peninsula of Denmark. So yeah. So there's this through line of traditions even into the 19th and 20th century of like somewhat sinister and gruesome tales for kids. I mean, you could even look at it like what's his name, who did the Addams Family, Charles Addams, who did the amazing things, and they're slightly ghoulish and weird, and they're fun, and it's a similar idea. There's like this slightly sinister sort of handling of that. And these are Roald Dahl is another one, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. All those they're definitely on the dark and creepy side, and yet they're children's classics. So yeah, so there's a long-standing tradition of this kind of stuff. We think of like sanitized versions of things in Disney and whatever, but yeah, there's a lot of creepy, weird stuff in children's literature.
Yeah, because it started here, and the amount of filter that it went through to get here. So
yeah. So that's part of it, is that we have a long tradition of this sort of stuff that continues in some ways. So it's not at all surprising that like our sort of time of year that we often associate with happiness and gift giving and children is also sort of plagued with these really dark stories as well. And that's it. It makes them really interesting. I think it's really fascinating. So yeah.
Well, I think it's like that with a lot of holidays. It's just not delved into as much, because if you look into, like Valentine's Day, Easter, what Easter was.
The sequel to Scary Book of Christmas Lore is just out, and I'm happy to come back and talk to it another time. It is the Scary Book of Valentine's Day Lore, which is all about horrible stories, not so much monsters, but stories of sort of like, jealousy and betrayal and murder and all sorts of things from around the world. And there's a series that I'm now doing for them. And that was the second one they asked me to do. So yeah, Valentine himself has a whole history as a martyr and all that. So yeah, happy to come back and talk about that in January or February if you'd like. But yeah, so that a lot of these celebratory things have these kind of kind of sinister undertones. And I find it really fascinating. I think it's really, really interesting what we have, what we do find out about these when you start scratching the surface and sort of looking underneath and finding out what the psychology of these are. And I think it's also interesting because I do wonder personally, if we want to steer it a little bit more toward the paranormal for a few minutes, is like, when you look at these stories of Krampus, Frau Perchta, Belsnickel, all of these, the Christmas ogres and witches and demons and such, you wonder, did people really believe in any of these? Were they only there as scary stories for children? Were they Santa Claus type stories? Or did people actually create these legends based on unknown things that they saw in the forest? Did someone see something that they were, didn't know what was in an Austrian forest or in the Alps or something? And
I would guess it's a very 50-50 split of there were
Yeah.
those people that were like, yeah, you don't see it out there. And then other that are like, nah, it's just to get the kids to do their chores. And
Yes. Yeah, I think they grew up together. I think people saw things they couldn't explain. And, whether they were real or not, who knows? Who can say? There might have been some genuine cryptids, wandering around the Germanic forests and Nordic forests and stuff in centuries past that really freak people out. So it's entirely possible. Some of them are so vivid in their appearances and stuff that you have to wonder what actually inspired that. Was it just overactive imagination? Was it just fear? Did they really see something that they thought looked like this? Did they really see this thing? It's fascinating. So yeah. There's all sorts of legends about like night creatures and such. There's, going back to your Viking question, there's the legend, the Germanic phenomenon known as the wild hunt, which is supposed to be the souls of the dead that on certain nights of the year, particularly in the winter, it's hounds, it's humans, it's other nighttime creatures, said in some places to be led by the Norse god Odin, and that parade across the landscape. And you don't ever want to see them, because if you do see it, there's a chance that you'll be sucked into it and become a part of the wild hunt forever yourself. So it's a kind of ghost story that's set at the holiday time as well. So yeah, there's
I guess that would be a double. Don't go out past this time, and
exactly, and don't go
over there, because.
And Japan is, I was saying before, Japan has its own legends and has a lot of the through line in a lot of Japanese legends is ghost things, and it's very often, as you might know, vengeful female ghosts is like a real popular thing in Japanese lore. If you're looking at films like The Grudge and The Ring and such, and like these really horrific creatures. And it speaks to, I think, a lot of different things, in that I think a lot of, certainly in centuries past, women in Japan and other Asian countries were very, very constrained. It didn't have much in the way of rights. And I think that these stories often derive their ghosts of women who were wronged in life that come back to actually enact terrible vengeance on the living. And it's interesting that there is a very strong through line of that kind of vengeance in there, that if you're caught out at the wrong place at the wrong time, you're screwed, basically. One of my favorites is actually a story about a ghost called Yuki Onna, which various Japanese writers and such have claimed to have actually seen. So we're getting back to that paranormal thing. They've actually claimed Yuki Onna is often described as a beautiful Japanese woman wearing all white, but she's pretty much she's made up pretty much entirely of ice, and she can be harmless, but she can also be very dangerous. And often what happens is that if you're in the forest or you're walking on a pathway out in the woods somewhere, or anywhere that's in between civilizations, you might see her, and she might call out to you. And there's various legends about it. If you ignore her, you're safe, but others say if you don't ignore her, you're safe. And most often what happens is that she will try to embrace you, or she has a small child that tries to embrace you. And if you resist, they will tackle you and basically breathe on you and freeze you to death, or they will throw you off the side of a cliff so that you die or freeze in the snowdrifts. So there's this whole thing, and we don't really know. Again, the story about her, some say that she was a goddess that was stranded on Earth. There's other legends that say that she was murdered by someone and is still trying to seek vengeance for them. But she's not a Christmas spirit specifically, but I mentioned her in my book because she is very much a wintertime spirit and phantom that's seen mostly in January, in the equivalent of January. And various people have claimed to have actually seen her while out walking in the woods. So it's one of those on the edge of folklore meets paranormal. Like, we consider it part of folklore, but there are any number of people that have actually claimed to see this spirit or versions of her at various places around Japan in the winter months. So we're in that area between folklore and paranormal and real and not real, and just a campfire story versus something people actually saw, which I always find fascinating when you think, well, what is there an actual basis for this? Is there a historical or physical basis for this folkloric legend? Is there something out there that inspired this? And it seems that in this case, reports of her go back to the 15th century in Japan. So a long time, 500-600 years, people have been claiming to see this vengeful female ghost that can be very deadly and freeze you to death. And if you get away with your life, you're considered very lucky. So yeah.
What I find very interesting whenever it comes to like the paranormal with both Japanese and Chinese culture is they're very accepting. It's not like us that are like, oh, okay. And they're just like, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still very much.
Yeah, there's a ghost in the apartment down but we don't talk about it.
just let her be.
Well,
yeah.
I had watched like a mini documentary. I believe it was when there was the tsunami in Japan, was it?
After the Fukushima earthquake?
Yes. And people were going around talking to different people who were just like, yeah, it would be 9 or 10 o'clock and we'd get a knock on the door and it would be someone asking if they were alive or dead, and we just had to assure them that they were dead, and they'd go on and they'd
wow.
Or I'd be driving. I was a taxi driver, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a lady in the back seat. All of a sudden, somehow, and they're so chill about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was just like,
well,
I mean, props to them for just being like, no, it's cool. You're dead. Just go ahead. Just go on.
I'll take your word. Where do you want to get out? Yeah, it's part of that is that Japanese culture still is deeply. It's a modern society. Of course, it's one of the most modern, quote unquote, societies on earth. But there's a deep within Japanese spiritual beliefs is a deeply rooted animistic religion called Shintoism, which believes that the entire world is populated with spirits all around, nature spirits of trees, rocks, place. So to them, even though a lot of people are modern and secular, they have this deep-rooted folkloric and spiritual tradition that the world is alive with spirits all the time. So even if they're kind of skeptical or secular in their daily lives, they're not going to be as freaked out about it because they've grown up in this, and it's in their entertainment, it's in their manga and anime, it's in all of these things. The idea of Shinto spirits everywhere. It's one of the world's largest animistic religions, and it's sort of blended with Buddhism when Buddhism was introduced to Japan. But it's interesting that so the fusion of those two things, I think, has left people still very open to that idea, so that even if they're living secular lives, even if they're atheist or whatever, they're still not completely closed off to the idea that there was a ghost sitting on the bus behind me the other day. No biggie. It's just So I think there's a psychology there that's already kind of attuned to that, and that may even make them more able to be open to see such things anyway. I think one has to be in the right mindset for these things as well. And I think if you have a whole society that is a little bit more attuned to that, even if it's not explicitly stated, it's going to be easier for people to actually see those things to begin with. Yeah.
I just remember watching that. It was, I forget, I think it was on like an episode of the newer Unsolved Mysteries
on Netflix.
Yeah. I think it was like the season 2 or something, or it might have been in that first season of the new. But I was just like, they're just walking around like it's nothing, and I'm like,
yeah, we're not as accepting of these things. Well, I mean, even the Native Americans were even more accepting than we are. Our culture now is very, I don't know what the correct word would be, but sheltered. We're very close-minded.
It's a result of many centuries of sort of mechanistic thinking and certain ways of viewing the world and such, and Cartesian logic and such, all of which have their place and they're very important. But I think one of the reasons that stories like this, like Krampus and such, are making a comeback is people are still hungering for that kind of thing. There's an interesting, even though it's grotesque and sinister, it represents a kind of deep connection to something that I think we feel like we've lost in some sense. So that's why you're seeing like these things making a big comeback and over the last 10, 20. Krampus has been popular for about 20 years now in America, but it's never completely gone out of style in Germany and Austria and other places. Yeah.
Well, and I would say there are probably a lot of people thinking the same thing of like, yeah, the kids need to be a little more scared.
Yeah, maybe.
Some of the commercialism out of it for sure. Well, Tim,
Absolutely.
what's your favorite one?
Oh, I'm sorry?
Which is your favorite?
Favorite? Oh, story?
The stories of the lore. Yeah, which one is?
I love the Yule Cat.
I
I love the Yule Cat. There's some great things from Greece. The Kallikantzari, I think, are like these little satyr-like demons that will, kind of like gremlins, they will wreck people's houses. That's really fun. There's an interesting legend from Turkey, from northern Turkey, which has almost similar vibes to like Yeti and Bigfoot sort of stories, like the big hairy man of the mountains kind of thing in the mountains in northern Turkey that will definitely snow in the winter. So that's a fascinating one. And again, that's that interesting crossover between folklore and possible crypto creatures, so it's interesting. Yeah, so those are fun. I love the Yule Cat. The Yule Cat is a favorite of mine. Yeah.
Well, in real life, have you had any paranormal experiences?
It's interesting because my undergraduate was an old independent college. Grew up in California, and it was in Marin County, which is the county just north of San Francisco. And there was an old independent university there called Dominican College. It was actually connected. I'm not Catholic myself, but it was connected to the Dominican convent there. And the old music building was said to be extremely haunted by members of the Hearst family. The Hearsts were the great philanthropists of one of the great philanthropic families of the early 20th, late 19th and early 20th centuries, and at least a couple members of them, because they used to own the property and they used to have a house there. At least a couple of them were said to actually haunt the music department, which I was actually studying music there at the time, which is an old 3-story building with a big performance stage in the middle, but then practice rooms and things all around it. And people that were there late at night doing practice would very often hear things like footsteps in the hallways and such, and they'd open the doors and look in both directions and they'd see nothing. One afternoon when I was there, I definitely I was upstairs on the 3rd floor, and I was the only person there, and I definitely heard what sounded like some kind of knocking or footstepping type stuff, but there was no one there. So make of it what you will. It didn't really freak me out. I didn't get like the hairs standing up on my neck or anything, but it was just an interesting thing. Yeah, that was when I had a friend of mine actually lived in the building. He was the caretaker for the building and had his own room, which had a shower and stuff and whatever. He used to get all sorts of crazy stuff, rattling and shaking and footsteps and stuff. It didn't bother him at all. He was really funny. It was just like, yeah, whatever, Then he came into my room one night and I was like, well, you just go out. I can't deal with this right now. And apparently they did. So I just spoke to them like humans, and yeah, it was fine. So
they were nice ghosts.
I was hoping we were going to get like some singing ghosts or get some like Phantom of the Opera stuff going
Seriously. So yeah, I heard a few creaks and knocks and stuff that might have just been the building settling, but it was a little odd, definitely. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, you touched on a little bit earlier about Catholicism. The Pope is now opening portals.
Oh, I have no idea. Never heard of it. No.
Supposedly starting, actually, I think he's already started. He's opening 5 portals.
I had heard nothing about this.
Yeah, they've got the bricked up walls in front of all the saints.
Oh, okay.
So they're going to break the bricks down, and he's going to open it up and have some ceremony. And he's calling them portals now.
Yeah, is that a good idea? Who knows?
The Pope did not. And then I heard today that our president's going over there, and I'm like, oh Lord, this is getting to be a little weird.
Yeah. No, I've heard nothing about that. That's really interesting. I'll have to.
Okay. I think we need to revisit a discussion we had with a previous guest of they're not even hiding it anymore.
I agree. I listened to
why does our president need to be over there for the opening of said portals?
He's Biden is Roman Catholic. I do know that. So maybe he was invited just for that reason. So okay. That would make sense. So and as a head of state,
he's not gonna know what's going on.
As a head of state, though, I mean, I can see that. So it's probably some sort of archaeological thing or whatever, and they're gonna that makes sense. Yeah. So when you first said opening portals, I was thinking something like the Cairn Collider in Switzerland, you know, and they were going to
Yeah, well, that's the way. That's the way.
Are we going to start Doctor Stranging it or something?
Exactly. Yeah, when I read the headline and they were calling portals, I'm like, what? The Pope's doing what?
Pope is now Doctor Strange, apparently, or whatever. So that's what I was thinking. I'm like, okay.
That was the first thing that I thought, too.
Well, that was where the headline
so I was like, wait.
When I read it, I was like,
wait a minute.
Hey, do we really want to be doing that? No, we don't want to be doing that.
At least don't let the Pope do it. Don't let the Pope do it.
Yeah, it was.
Like
I don't want to know what's going to come out of there.
You get Clive Barker monsters. Don't do that, okay? You want Cthulhu? That's how you get Cthulhu, okay? Let's not do that.
If he opens the portal and a little box comes out, don't touch it.
Touch it.
No limit configurations, please. No Lovecraftian horrors.
If they do, keep them there.
Yeah.
I'm already concerned enough. We've got 27 years later coming out this year. We don't need
a rage virus from another dimension.
No.
Well, I saw another headline that said it was something to the extent of the first UFO was crashed after the original Wizard of Oz, and now we're having all these sightings of something, and they just came out with the newest version, a newer version of the Wizard of Oz. Is it coincidence?
No.
Well, I listened to a show about
it anymore, Glenn.
It's those damn monkeys.
Exactly.
You want flying monkeys? That's how we get them.
I listened to a podcast by Stephen Greer earlier, and he said, people don't realize what you see in movies, we already have. We can already do. Right. And I'm like, and I instantly went to the Marvel MCU, and I'm like, whoa. So,
if you have the Infinity Stones, hide them now.
Maybe I've read too many comic books.
Guilty.
Yeah, that's how I grew up. So
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Are you a Marvel or DC man?
I was both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started with Marvel in the 80s, but then when DC started really ramping up their cool stuff in the mid 80s and on after John Byrne went over there and stuff, I became a DC guy as well. So, and then got into like all the like Watchmen and Sandman and all that kind of stuff too. So, yeah.
Okay, well, since we have broached the topic, have we seen the new Superman trailer?
Yeah, it's very good. I enjoyed it. I feel like I personally feel like James Gunn has really got the feel for how it should be. So, yeah.
Glenn.
Okay. No, I have not seen it. No, I have not seen it. So
I have some complaints, but
that's quite all right.
Good. I feel like DC is just on this rampage of they pick people that are good for one role but not the other. Like I really loved Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
Good Bruce Wayne. For Batman. I liked his smartassery, so I appreciated that. And like we didn't really get to see Henry Cavill much as Clark Kent, but he was a really good Superman. Where I feel like this new guy, I feel like they tried to find as close to a Henry Cavill lookalike as they could find.
Right.
And they keep screwing up the costume. I felt like he made a presentable Clark Kent.
Yeah.
We finally have a good Lex Luthor.
He looks great. He looks really good. Yeah.
Like, mwah.
Yeah.
But
the young version.
No to Lois Lane now. We were watching it whenever I got into work yesterday, and everybody was just like, "But we've got Crypto."
Yes, and that's all that matters is the dog.
Yeah, we were just like, "That's all."
All right, Tim. Before I let you go, I'll switch back to one thing. Do you believe in Bigfoot?
Yeah, I live up in the Pacific Northwest. It's kind of required, so yeah, I don't see why not. I've read a lot about the stories and stuff. In fact, I don't live that far from Mount St. Helens, which has one of the most famous Bigfoot stories of all. The creatures attacking the cabin one night. So yeah, I'm only an hour or two drive away from it. So yeah, it's very much part of the lore up here. And a lot of people drive around with like Bigfoot stickers on their cars and hoodies and things with it. So yeah, it's very much part of the lore. So
well,
do you have a favorite cryptid?
Love the Jersey Devil and the Dover Demon. It's another one I'm very fond of. I think a lot of these creatures in my Christmas book qualify as cryptids in their own way. Yeah. So,
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Tim, tell everybody where they can find your stuff because we want
Okay, sure. My website is just timrayborn.com, TIMRAYBORN.com. Very easy. It's got all my books and stuff and links to them. A lot of them are available. Like the Christmas lore book, you can find in Barnes and Noble. Just ask for it; they have it there. That's a great one. As is the new Valentine's Day book has just come out, and I'm going to be ramping up stuff for that in January and February. But those are my two of my most recent books. As I said, I also have a big comprehensive guide to Northern mythology and various other books on my website. Some fantasy novels that I've written, various other things. So I work with a lot of different publishers, and it's a lot of fun. So I really feel very blessed to be able to do what I do. It's great.
So clear your schedule for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, I was just pulling up. We haven't started scheduling February. In the week of Valentine's Day, I have no one on that Wednesday at 9 or 10 o'clock if you're interested. So
yeah, I could definitely do that. Again, I'm on the West Coast, so I can't do too early in the morning your time. It needs to be, my time. So, but yeah, early February, you want to do something for Valentine's Day, happy to do it. That would be delightful. Love to do it.
Heck yeah, I'll have to make sure my ladies are all present for that show. So. Yeah. Well, they all work in public safety. Well, not all of them, but two of them work in public safety, and so they kind of got weird schedules. So getting them all together is.
Now, is Erin night shift or is she day shift? Is she night shift too?
She's 6P to 6A.
Okay.
So yeah. So
night shift girly too.
Yeah. I'm glad I don't do that anymore. If you care, Tim, I'm a retired firefighter paramedic. So.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, that's really cool. That's great.
Yeah, or retarded. I'm not sure which. So
both. And he just drags you down into the trenches with him.
Yes, I got Cheyenne in it, so she's got me to blame for this.
But I have got official clearance to tell the coppers to F off whenever I'm trying to take a call. So
okay, I was hoping you say you got your first security clearance. I was going to say, man, that was quick. So
No, hold on. Before we hop off here, I do want to show you something on the side of cryptids. Hold on.
Oh, mercy. I'm afraid to look. And I did look. I asked my wife to look while we were on here if we had your book already, because I swear it looks familiar. And she says, look on the bookshelf behind you. I think that's where that one is. So I may already have yours and just haven't read it yet.
Oh, the Northern mythology book? Cool. Yeah. Well, happy to come on and talk about that anytime. Sure, I would love to.
Oh yeah, because I'm just learning that and I'm fascinated with it. So.
Okay, well, this is a very good introduction, if I do say so myself. It draws from a lot of scholarly sources, but makes it very easy reading. So it's meant for ages about 14 and up. It doesn't censor anything, and it kind of is like the uncensored versions of these crazy myths. But yeah, no, I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you do.
Okay, so, yeah, I'll let you know.
So I got my fancy little key card, right?
Oh, yes.
Boring. So I was like, okay. Here's what we're going to do.
Mothman? Yeah.
We're going to Mothman it.
Mothman it. Excellent. That's great.
I'll put you on a list. So. Tim, I've enjoyed having you. And we're definitely going to schedule. I'll let you know about what day in February we can get together and work it out, because that would be awesome. Yes. And I have a feeling we might have you back there for the Norse.
Sure.
And I had started a book and I can't remember, but they believe it's I don't know if it's a religion, but it's a way of life for an older culture, and they believe in Yeti. It's actually in their family chain. So
interesting.
I might bring you back on that. So yeah, because I'm the Bigfoot guy. So
that's great.
But Tim, have a Merry Christmas. Thank you for coming on. And I enjoy it. And I hope everybody goes buys your book, and we will have you back soon.
Sounds great. I would love to. It sounds really fun. Really fun talking to you both.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Tim. I really appreciate it. Merry Christmas.
Glad we were able to do it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I am too. All right. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, that was great. You got
Yes.
something on your face. That was really great.
I
I
love
didn't
that
know
shit.
some of that stuff. I didn't know some of it. So yeah, that was really great.
Well, there was a lot of it that I didn't know about. I actually, something you might be interested in, there is an issue of Hellboy where Hellboy fights Krampus.
Ooh, I'll have to look for that one. Okay.
I'll have to have Travis send it to me because I got it for him for Christmas one year. Um,
Okay.
I don't
Yeah,
care for the Hellboy art, but it is an issue of Hellboy fighting Krampus.
I like it.
But
like it.
no, it's funny because a lot of that Christmas stuff I found from watching The Office. Dwight comes in the office dressed up as Belschnickel, and Belschnickel decides whether you have been impish or admirable. So if you have been admirable, you get a small gift. I guess would be similar to like you got your fruit or nuts, or in this case, Belschnickel was giving them little wooden bowls. And if you were admirable, or if you were impish, you got the shit smacked out of you with a bushel of branches.
And I'm slowly learning a lot about the Norse. I had not heard of Yule Cat, so that's my reading for tonight. And I'm going to see if I have his book. Well, we can't say where we'll be. We'll be back after the first of the year. Let's see. I think our first scheduled show back is the 8th, January the 8th. Which is Elvis's birthday. We should have somebody on that's an Elvis impersonator.
I'm sure it wouldn't be too hard to find.
I'll get Brenda on that. She seems like the type that would be able to do that. So,
yeah.
All right, deal. So that we will be back then. Until then, everybody have a Merry Christmas. I hope Santa was good to you, and we will see you.
Hopefully, you don't wind up with any lashes from Krampus.
That's true.
And you don't wind up in any snow globes on Krampus's shelf.
That's where I'm afraid you're going to put me. So
that's how you got to plead your case with him.
Yeah. Well, all right. Everybody have a Merry Christmas. We will see you soon. We will have a New Year's Eve show, or New Year's Eve or New Year's Day show lined up for you here in the near future. So see you soon.
You're going to want to be here for that.
Oh, yes, you are. If you liked our show with Vic, just go back and research it. You'll love this show. Everybody have a Merry Christmas. We'll see you soon. Bye.